My father didn't shout when he erased me. He didn't slam a door, call security, or make a scene. He simply handed a young officer a guest list that said I was not family. At his Navy retirement ceremony, my golden boy brother had a front row seat, a tribute video, and our father's pride. I had general overflow seating, if space allows. For 15 years, they called me the failure. What they didn't know was that the son they cut out of every photograph had become a Rear Admiral. And before that night ended, the whole room would stand for me while my father couldn't even look me in the eye. I used to think being ignored was the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing they had planned my absence carefully, politely, and with smiles on their faces. That kind of betrayal doesn't make noise. It just teaches you who never intended to save you a seat. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, what time are you listening and where are you watching from? My name is Keaton Voss, and the first time my father erased me in public, he did it with a guest list. I arrived at Naval Station Norfolk with an invitation folded inside my jacket pocket. It was not one of the glossy ones I saw in other people's hands. Mine was older, softer at the corners, the kind of paper that had been handled too many times by a man who did not want to admit he still cared. My mother had mailed it 3 weeks earlier without a note, just the invitation. Just enough to say, come if you want, but not enough to say, I'll stand beside you when you do. The base looked the way Navy places always do on ceremony days. Flags moving in the coastal air, polished shoes, dress whites catching the afternoon light. Families walking in together with that easy confidence people have when they know exactly where they belong. I walked toward the check-in table and gave my name to the young officer holding the tablet. Keaton Voss, I said. He looked down, typed, then paused. That pause was small. Half a second maybe, but I had spent a career reading pauses. He tried again. Sir, are you family? I kept my voice even. I'm his son. His eyes flicked up, then back to the screen. He scrolled once, twice. His thumb moved carefully, like he hoped the right answer was hiding lower on the list. I saw the names before he said anything. Captain Dorian Voss, Maribel Voss, Commander Callum Voss, Elowen Voss, VIP family seating, front section, procession cleared. My name was not there. The officer's jaw tightened just a little. I'm sorry, sir. I don't see you under family seating. I did not move. He tapped another tab and there it was, tucked beneath a secondary note, small enough to be missed, but clear enough to wound. Keaton Voss. General overflow seating if space allows. For a moment, the sounds around me thinned out. Shoes on pavement, low laughter, a woman telling her husband to fix his collar. Somewhere beyond the entrance, applause rose inside the hall, warm and practiced. General overflow. Not son, not family, not even guest of honor's child. Overflow, if space allows. I looked down at the invitation in my hand. My mother's envelope had carried me through the gate. My father's list had stopped me at the door. The young officer cleared his throat. Sir, I can check with protocol. His nameplate read Bram Keller. He looked too young to be involved in something this ugly. That made it worse. My family had turned a stranger into the one who had to tell me I did not belong. Before I answered, I saw my father. Captain Dorian Voss stood 20 yards away near the entrance, surrounded by men who had served with him, men who knew the public version of him. Straight back, silver hair, uniform pressed so sharply it looked carved. He was laughing at something one of them said. Then he saw me. For 1 second, I let myself believe he would fix it, not apologize, not explain, just lift one hand and say, that's my son. That was all it would have taken. Bram followed my gaze. He seemed to understand there was history standing between us. He turned slightly toward my father, waiting for direction. My father's eyes met mine. No surprise, no confusion, no guilt. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve the way he always did when he wanted people to notice how calm he was. Then he looked at Bram and said, "Carry on." Two ordinary words. In the Navy, they meant continue. In my family that afternoon, they meant erase him. Bram looked uncomfortable. "Sir," my father had already turned away. I heard a man beside him ask, "Everything all right, Dorian?" My father smiled, smooth as polished brass. "Nothing that concerns the ceremony." That hit harder than anger would have. He did not deny me with shouting. He denied me with procedure. I stood there holding a paper invitation to an event I had apparently been removed from. And I knew exactly what would happen if I raised my voice. I would become the problem, the difficult son, the one who could not let Callum have his moment, the disappointment who showed up to make a scene. My father had been counting on that, so I gave him nothing. I folded the invitation once, carefully, along the crease already worn into it. My thumb pressed the paper flat. In the parking lot behind me, inside the glove compartment of my car, sat an old brass compass my grandfather had left me. I thought of it then, though I did not go back for it. He used to say, "Never let someone else tell you where you belong." At the time, I thought that was advice for boys. At 47, I was beginning to understand it was a warning for men. Bram lowered his voice. "I can see if there's a seat in the rear section." "That's all right," I said. He looked relieved and ashamed at the same time. I stepped away from the family entrance as another wave of applause rolled through the doors. Inside, they were already celebrating the son my father wanted everyone to see. I thought being left off the list would be the worst part of that day. I was wrong. By the time I walked into the back of the hall, I realized my name was not the only thing they had removed. I entered through a side door near the back of the hall, the kind of entrance used by staff, late guests, and people nobody wanted to interrupt the program. That felt about right. The room was already full. Rows of dress whites faced the stage. Navy flags stood behind the podium. A large screen glowed above it, showing old photographs from my father's career. People leaned toward one another, smiling the way they do at retirement ceremonies, when everybody wants to believe a life can be wrapped neatly into medals, speeches, and applause. I found an empty chair near the rear wall. Not family seating, not even close. From where I sat, I could see the front row clearly. My mother sat with her hands folded over her purse. Callum sat beside her, wearing the easy smile of a man who had never had to wonder whether a chair had been saved for him. Elowyn leaned close to him, whispering something that made him nod. My father stood near the stage, already being treated like a legend. The screen shifted to a photograph of him younger, standing beside a ship, one hand on Callum's shoulder. Then another. Dorian and Callum. Callum and Dorian. Father and heir. The room chuckled warmly when a childhood photo appeared. Callum, maybe 12, holding a model ship in both hands. The caption underneath read, "Commander Callum Voss, born with Navy in his blood." I stopped breathing for a second. That model was mine. I had built it at our kitchen table over one summer, hunched over blueprints while other kids were outside throwing baseballs. I remembered the smell of glue on my fingers. I remembered sanding the tiny hull until my thumb blistered. In the original photo, I was standing beside Callum, grinning like a kid who thought his father might finally notice what his hands could make. On the screen, I was gone. Only the edge of my blue shirt remained near the frame, a mistake left by whoever edited me out. A woman behind me whispered, "Captain Voss only had one son, right?" Someone answered, "That's what I always thought." I kept my eyes forward. There are insults you can answer. Then there are wounds so carefully prepared that responding only gives them more room to grow. The master of ceremonies, Porter Hales, stepped up with his cards. He had the polished voice of a man who had done 100 military events and trusted whatever script was handed to him. "Captain Dorian Voss represents the finest tradition of naval service," he said, "and that tradition continues through his son, Commander Callum Voss." His son, not sons. The room applauded like nothing was missing. But missing things have a sound. It is not loud. It is the silence around your name when it should have been spoken. I looked at my mother again. She did not turn around. The video continued. Fishing trips, commissioning ceremonies, family Christmas photos. I saw proof of myself in the corners. Half a sleeve, one hand on a chair, the shadow of a boy standing just outside the chosen frame. That was when I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My family had not simply called me a disappointment, they had practiced removing me. When the applause rose again, I stood quietly and moved toward the side corridor. I needed air, but I did not want to leave the building. Leaving would make their version easier. So I walked slowly past the back table where extra programs and seating charts were stacked. A folder lay open near a small sign marked Family Procession. I would have ignored it. I should have ignored it. Then I saw my name, Keaton Voss. My hand went still. The page was not dramatic, no red ink, no angry handwriting, just a printed planning note with neat spacing and the kind of language people use when they want cruelty to look professional. Remove Keaton Voss from family recognition materials. Below that, do not detract from Commander Callum Voss's role in the ceremony. At the bottom was my father's approval, D. Voss. For a moment, the hallway narrowed around the paper. The lights overhead hummed. Someone inside laughed at a joke from the stage. Life kept moving, which felt almost offensive. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an old man forgetting to add a name. This had been planned, reviewed, and signed by my father. I read the lines again, not because I needed to, but because part of me still wanted the words to rearrange themselves into something less deliberate. They didn't. A man can train himself to stay calm in ugly situations. He can keep his face still. He can slow his breathing. He can make his hands behave. But there are moments when discipline does not stop pain. It only keeps pain from becoming a performance. I folded the page once and slid it inside my jacket. Not to use. Not yet. Evidence is only powerful when you understand the room you are standing in. I stepped outside through a service door for less than a minute. The evening air smelled faintly of salt and hot pavement. I reached into my pocket and touched the old brass compass I had taken from the glove compartment before coming in. My grandfather had given it to me when I was young, long before my father decided which son counted. Never let someone else tell you where you belong. I turned it in my palm until the needle settled. What hurts more, being forgotten, or finding out someone worked hard to erase you? I already knew my answer. Inside, the applause started again, louder this time. Callum's name carried through the wall. I put the compass away and went back in, quieter than before, but not smaller. Then I heard my brother's voice from around the corner, and what he said changed everything. I had just stepped back from the service corridor when I heard Callum say my name. It was not loud. It was not meant for the room. It came from a conference room tucked behind the auditorium, where the door had been left open by a few inches. I stopped with one hand near the wall. A smarter man, or maybe a kinder one, would have kept walking. But when your own name is spoken in a voice that sounds worried, you listen. Callum was inside with another officer, a man whose voice I recognized from the old Norfolk circuit. They were standing close enough to the door that I could hear every word without moving closer. If he walks in wearing that uniform, Callum said, everything changes. The other man gave a soft laugh. Come on, Callum. It's your father's night. You don't understand. My brother's voice dropped lower. My entire career, people compared me to him behind closed doors. I felt my fingers curl against my palm. The man inside paused. Then why doesn't anyone know? Callum answered without hesitation. Because Dad made sure they didn't. That sentence did more damage than the memo in my jacket. The memo proved my father planned it. Callum's words proved my brother understood it. For years, I had told myself Callum was just the favored son, the polished one, the safe bet, the man my father could introduce without explaining classified work, missed holidays, sealed commendations, and silent assignments. But Callum was not blind. He knew there was another story. He had simply enjoyed the one that served him better. The officer inside asked, "Is this really about him?" Callum exhaled hard. "Tonight has to be clean. Dad said no distractions, no surprises. My promotion board is already watching. You know how this works. Perception matters." There it was. Not family, not tradition, not even pride. Perception. I thought back to years of holiday dinners where Callum smiled while relatives said, "At least one Voss boy stayed on track." I remembered my father clapping him on the shoulder and saying, "That's what leadership looks like." I remembered sitting at the far end of the table, hearing my own life reduced to a vague, uncomfortable silence. And Callum never once said, "Keaton is serving too." Not once. The conversation shifted, and I stepped away before they could see me. I did not want the satisfaction of catching him. Not yet. A truth discovered quietly is sometimes more useful than one thrown into the room too soon. I walked down the hall, out a side exit, and across the lot toward my car. The sun had dipped lower. Heat still rose from the pavement, but the air had changed, carrying that early evening salt smell off the water. Inside my car, the noise of the ceremony became faint. My hands rested on the steering wheel until the shaking in them settled into stillness. I opened the glove compartment and took out my grandfather's brass compass. It was scratched, old, and heavier than it looked. When I was a boy, he used to take me on a small fishing boat before sunrise. My father hated that I loved maps more than sports. My grandfather never did. "People get lost," he told me once, "when they start following someone else's map." I stared at the needle until it steadied. For 15 years, I had believed my family saw me as a failure. Now I understood something worse. They saw enough to be afraid. That changed the shape of everything. Have you ever realized the person standing in your way was not stronger than you, just more protected? I leaned back in the seat and let that question sit with me. I could leave, drive through the gate, head back to Virginia Beach, and let Dorian Voss have his clean little ceremony. No confrontation, no scene, no old wound opened in public. But leaving would mean helping them finish the job. Before I could decide, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. Secure military notification. The sender's name appeared on the screen, Vice Admiral Soren Pike. And in that moment, I knew the evening had just become bigger than my father's retirement. The secure message opened with no greeting. "We heard what happened at the gate." I sat in my car with the compass in one hand and my phone in the other. The sender was Vice Admiral Soren Pike, a man who did not waste words, did not chase gossip, and did not involve himself in family drama unless that family drama had started brushing against Navy business. A second message appeared before I could respond. "Your presence matters more than they want to admit." Then a third, "Do not leave." I stared at those 3 lines until the screen dimmed. Outside the windshield, people were moving between the ceremony hall and the reception area. Some carried programs, some laughed with paper cups in hand. From a distance, it looked like a clean, respectable Navy evening. A fine officer retiring, a proud family gathered, nothing broken, nothing ugly. That was the trouble with polished things. They reflected light beautifully, but they hid fingerprints. My thumb hovered over the reply box. I almost typed, "Understood." Then I stopped. What was I supposed to say? That my own father had placed me in overflow seating? That my brother was worried I might show up as myself? That my mother had mailed the invitation but failed to save me a chair? Some things sound smaller when you explain them. They lose the weight they had when they were sitting on your chest. So I typed only, "Thank you, sir." A minute later, Soren answered, "Rusk is inside, others too. You will not stand alone." Rusk. The name reached into a place I had kept locked away for years. Master Chief Arden Rusk, retired SEAL. A man tied to an operation most people would never hear about, and no one in my family would have understood, even if I could explain it. The sort of man the Navy remembered quietly. I put the phone down and closed my eyes for a breath. The Navy knew. The men I had served beside knew. My commanders knew. It was only my family that had treated my life like an inconvenience. That thought did not make me proud. It made me tired in a way sleep would not fix. I stepped out of the car and started back toward the building. The air had cooled, and the sky over the base was turning that soft blue-gray that comes before night. I slipped the compass into my pocket and crossed the parking lot with no hurry. I had learned a long time ago that walking fast only tells people you are rattled. Near the side entrance, Elowen stepped out from beneath the covered walkway. Callum's wife had always been careful around me. Not unkind, just careful, like she knew there were old wires under the floorboards and did not want to step on the wrong one. "Keaton," she said quietly. "Elowen." She looked over her shoulder before coming closer. "Dorian knows you're here." I assumed he did when he looked right at me and told the check-in officer to carry on. Her face changed, not shock, confirmation. "He's not upset," she said. That almost made me laugh, but I kept it inside. "That's generous of him." "No." She folded her arms, holding herself together. "He's scared." That word landed differently. My father had been many things in my life: harsh, certain, proud, cold when cold served him. But scared? I had never allowed myself to imagine it. Elowen lowered her voice. "People are asking questions. Some senior officers came in after the program started. A few recognize your name. Callum is trying to act like it's nothing, but he keeps checking the room." "Did he send you out here?" "No. I came because somebody should say something honest in this family." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she added, "I don't know what they told everyone about you, but I know what they're doing tonight isn't right." It was not an apology. It was not enough to mend anything, but it was the first honest sentence I had heard from someone connected to my family all evening. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, then went back inside before anyone noticed she had been talking to me. I did not follow her right away. Instead, I walked to the small outdoor terrace on the side of the building, where the water could be seen past the railings, and the sound from the reception came through the walls in dull waves. Applause, a microphone hum, my father's world continuing without me. There, with my hand on the railing, I gave myself one last chance to leave. I could drive away, let them have the night. Let Dorian keep his spotless story and Callum keep his borrowed shine. No confrontation, no family collapse under fluorescent lights and flag displays. For a few minutes, that sounded almost peaceful. Then I asked myself the question I had avoided for most of my adult life. What am I still hoping they will give me? A seat? An apology? A father's approval at 47 years old? The answer came slowly, and it hurt because it was true. Nothing they offered tonight could restore what they had already taken. I took the compass out again. The little needle settled north, steady as a promise. My grandfather's voice came back to me, rough and patient. People get lost when they start following someone else's map. For years, I had mistaken my family for north, the destination, the measure, the home port. They were not north. They were only a landmark I had outgrown. My phone vibrated again. "They know you're here." A second message followed. "Several SEAL teams are attending." I looked toward the hall, and this time the sound coming from inside felt different. Not like applause, like pressure building behind a closed door. For 15 years, I had been invisible by design. But invisibility only works until someone turns on the light. When I stepped back inside, the reception had already begun. The chairs from the formal ceremony were being ignored now. People stood in small circles with paper plates, coffee cups, and the relaxed posture that comes after a public event has moved into private congratulations. Laughter floated around the room. A photographer was trying to gather my father, Callum, and my mother near the flags for another family picture. Another family picture without me. I stayed near the edge of the room, close enough to see everything, far enough away that no one could accuse me of forcing myself into the scene. But something had changed. Not loudly, Not enough for a casual guest to notice. Still, I felt it the way you feel weather shift before rain. A captain I had worked with years earlier looked in my direction, then looked again. Two senior officers stopped their conversation when they saw me. One man leaned toward his wife and whispered something. Her eyes moved from my face to my father, then back to me. The silence around me was starting to crack. My family noticed too. My father kept smiling, but his smile had become tighter. Callum posed for photographs with his hand resting on the back of my mother's chair, acting as if the evening belonged exactly where it had always belonged, in his hands. No one from my family approached me. That was the message. If they could not remove me from the room, they would remove me from the circle. A retired admiral I did not know lifted his glass toward Callum and said, "Your father must sleep well knowing the Voss legacy is secure." Callum gave that modest little laugh people use when they want praise to continue. "Well," he said, "I've had a good example." My father placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've earned every bit of it." I waited. One sentence would have been enough. "My brother serves too. My brother is here. My brother has done more than people know." Callum said nothing. That hurt in a cleaner way than the insults. Insults at least admit you exist. Silence makes you do all the bleeding alone. The weight of the day pressed into me then. Not one moment. All of it. The guest list, the cropped photographs, the memo, the conversation behind the door. The years of dinners where my work was treated like a vague embarrassment nobody wanted to discuss, too close to dessert. For a few minutes I felt tired beyond anger. Maybe I should have stayed away. Maybe peace really was worth more than truth. Maybe a man gets to an age where he should stop expecting family to become decent just because he finally has proof. I looked toward the side exit. The door was open. Beyond it was the hallway, then the parking lot, then my car. I could be gone in less than 5 minutes. No scene, no raised voices, no old grief spilled across my father's polished retirement night. Then a young lieutenant stepped into my path. He was maybe 30, with the careful bearing of someone still learning how to look confident in rooms full of senior officers. "Sir," he said quietly, "Rear Admiral Voss?" I studied his face. "That depends who's asking." He almost smiled. "Lieutenant Elias Mercer, sir. Naval Intelligence. I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me," he lowered his voice. "I just wanted to say thank you. A lot of us studied your work. Not the classified parts, of course. The structure, the coordination models, the way you built cross-command response channels." That caught me off guard. Not because of the content, because of the timing. Elias glanced toward the reception floor. "Most people here have no idea how many careers exist because of what you built." I looked at him and for a moment I saw myself at his age. Eager, serious, still believing work would speak loudly enough if it mattered. "Be careful with rooms like this," I told him. He seemed unsure what I meant. I nodded toward the crowd. "Some rooms reward volume. Some reward loyalty. Very few reward truth right away. Don't let that make you doubt the truth." He absorbed that like a man who needed to hear it. "Yes, sir." After he walked away, I stood there with the side exit still visible, and the decision became sharper than it had been outside. If I stayed, I risked breaking whatever thin shell remained around my family. If I left, I helped them protect the lie. Either choice would cost me something. I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around my grandfather's compass. The brass was warm now from being carried. I remembered him placing it in my 12-year-old palm and saying, "The hardest direction to follow is the right one." Back then, I thought he meant woods and water. He meant nights like this. So I stopped asking whether my father would change. I stopped asking whether Callum would suddenly grow a spine. I stopped waiting for my mother to turn around. Instead, I asked myself what kind of man I wanted to be when this night ended. Not the invisible son, not the bitter son, the honest one. Have you ever reached the point where protecting the peace meant betraying yourself? I had. and I was done calling that peace. I slipped the compass back into my pocket and turned toward the reception floor. That was when the room shifted again. Several men had entered near the main doors. Older, broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable bearing of men who had spent their lives doing hard things without needing applause. A few wore dress uniforms. Others wore dark suits with small pins that told their own quiet story. SEALs. One of them stopped when he saw me. His face changed from uncertainty to recognition. Then he began walking straight toward me. For the first time that evening, I realized the room might be about to stop listening to my family's version of the story. The man approaching me had survived a mission that should have ended in body bags, and he knew exactly who made sure it didn't. The man stopped a few feet from me, and the noise of the reception seemed to move behind glass. He was older than the file photograph I remembered. His hair had gone gray at the temples. One shoulder sat a little lower than the other. He carried himself like a man who had learned to live with pain without letting it introduce itself. Master Chief Arden Rusk, retired Navy SEAL. I knew his name from reports most people in that room would never see. I knew the night his team was cut off. I knew the 7 minutes that changed whether men came home or names went on a wall. He extended his hand. "I've wanted to thank you for 15 years, he said. My throat tightened, but my voice stayed steady. Master Chief. His grip was firm, not showy, not ceremonial, just real. 7 minutes, he said quietly. That's what you gave us. My boys got 40 more years because of you. I heard the words. I understood them. Still, part of me stood outside myself, watching a stranger give me the one thing my family had spent the evening withholding. Acknowledgement. Not pity, not flattery, a fact. 2 more men came up behind him, then another. Each one kept it brief. A handshake, a nod, a quiet, "Sir." No one gave details. No one broke rules. They did not need to. Their faces said enough. Across the room, Callum noticed. His smile held for a second, then slipped. He looked from Arden to me, then toward our father, as if trying to understand how the invisible brother had suddenly become the center of a conversation he was not invited into. Dorian noticed next. My father had been surrounded by guests, accepting admiration like it was owed to him. Then his attention shifted. His posture changed just enough for me to catch it. The room had tilted, and he knew it. For the first time that evening, I did not feel like I was pushing against a locked door. I felt visible. That did not make me proud. It made me sad in a way I had not expected. Men who owed me nothing had crossed a room to say thank you. My own brother could not cross 10 feet to say, he belongs here too. Arden leaned closer. They left you off the program. I looked at him. He did not ask it like a question. I saw it, he said. A few of us did. Before I could answer, a protocol coordinator walked quickly toward the small stage. She whispered to Porter Hales, the MC. Porter looked uncomfortable, glanced at my father, and tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we're going to move into a special family tribute presentation. Special. That word told me everything. Dorian had made his move. The lights dimmed again. The screen filled with photographs and carefully chosen captions. Dorian's command history. Callum's commissioning. Callum beside ships. Callum shaking hands. Callum smiling beside my father under every version of the Voss name they wanted remembered. No Keaton, not as a child. Not as a son, not as an officer. Not even by accident this time. But now the omission did not hide me. It pointed at me. A commander near the bar murmured, "Isn't Rear Admiral Voss his son too?" Someone else answered, "That's what I was wondering." The question moved faster than gossip because it was not gossip anymore. It was evidence people could see with their own eyes. I stayed where I was. Part of me wanted to stand up, pull the memo from my jacket, and read my father's approval into the microphone. Part of me wanted to turn to Callum and ask whether the spotlight felt warm enough to excuse 15 years of silence. But anger has terrible timing when it is hungry. I had spent my career learning when to act and when to wait. Truth delivered too soon can be dismissed as bitterness. Truth allowed to ripen becomes impossible to deny. So I did nothing. My hand slipped into my pocket and touched the compass. The brass edge pressed against my palm. I thought of my grandfather and all those mornings on the water when he taught me that steady hands mattered more than loud voices. The tribute ended on one final image: Dorian and Callum, father and chosen son. The room applauded, but it was thinner now, polite, uneasy. People were clapping with questions in their eyes. My phone vibrated. I looked down. A secure message from Soren Pike waited on the screen. "They've decided to recognize you." I read it twice. Then I looked across the room at my father. He was still smiling, but there was fear behind it now. Not fear of me, fear of the truth arriving with witnesses. For 15 years, my family controlled the story. What they did not understand was that the room had started asking for the missing chapter. The final remarks began with the kind of order my father loved. Porter Hales returned to the microphone. Guests drifted back toward their tables. Coffee cups were set down. Conversations softened. On stage, my father stood beside Callum, both of them wearing the same controlled expression. That was how the Voss men performed under pressure. Not with shouting, with posture. My father looked toward the room as if the evening had always belonged to him, and still did. Callum stood half a step behind him, close enough to appear humble, visible enough to be admired. But the room had changed. People were no longer simply listening to the speeches. They were watching the spaces between them, watching who was named, watching who was avoided, watching me. I stayed near the back, one hand resting against the edge of a chair. The compass sat in my pocket. The memo was still folded inside my jacket. I had proof, but for once, proof was not the strongest thing in the room. Witnesses were. Porter cleared his throat. Before Captain Voss offers his closing remarks, we have a brief acknowledgement from Vice Admiral Soren Pike. My father's head turned quickly. Not much, but enough. Soren Pike rose from a table near the center aisle. He was calm in the way only senior officers can be calm when everyone else realizes the schedule has changed without permission. He walked to the microphone without hurry and shook Porter's hand. "Thank you," Soren said. Then he looked at my father. "Captain Voss, congratulations on a long and distinguished career. Decades of service deserve respect, and tonight we recognize the commitment you gave to the Navy." Polite applause followed. My father nodded once, accepting it. For a moment, it sounded safe. Then Soren turned slightly toward the room. "Ceremonies like this remind us that naval service often runs through families," he said. "But they also remind us that some of the most consequential service happens outside public view." The room became quieter. Callum's face tightened. My father stopped nodding. Soren continued, measured and clear. "Some officers carry responsibilities they cannot put on a family slideshow. Some lead work that cannot be described in a program booklet. Some spend their careers protecting people who may never learn their names." I felt every eye shift, not all at once, in pieces. A captain near the front turned first, then a couple at a side table, then the men near Arden Rusk. The room began finding me the way a map finds a coastline after fog lifts. Soren looked directly at me. "Rear Admiral Keaton Voss is one of those officers." There it was, my full name, my rank, spoken into the same microphone my family had used to erase me. No one applauded immediately, not because they disagreed, because the room was adjusting to the weight of what had just been said. Then an older intelligence officer stood. "I can't speak to details," he said, voice carrying from the left side of the hall. "But I can say Admiral Voss's work changed how several of us operated across commands." Another officer rose near the back. "Same here." Then a third. "There are people alive because of decisions made by men like him." No classified information, no drama, No one turned the evening into a spectacle. That made it stronger. These were not emotional relatives trying to rescue me. These were professionals giving shape to a truth my family had kept out of the frame. I looked at Callum. He was staring at the floor now, not ashamed enough to speak, but too exposed to smile. My father remained still. His face had the same hard discipline I had seen my entire life, but his eyes betrayed him. He was calculating, searching for the place where control could be recovered. There was none. I had imagined a moment like this in weaker seasons of my life. I imagined anger, a speech, maybe even my father being forced to apologize while the room watched. But standing there, I did not want any of that. Recognition given freely has a different sound. It does not beg. It does not explain itself. It simply arrives and stands where lies used to stand. My hand brushed the compass in my pocket. Earlier that evening, I had held it because I was unsure where to go. Now I knew exactly where I stood. Then Arden Rusk rose. He did not move quickly. Age and old injuries had earned the right to slow him down. But when he stood, the men around him noticed. A second SEAL stood beside him, then another, then more. Chair legs moved softly across the floor. Conversation stopped. Even the servers near the back froze with trays in their hands. The standing spread across the military section like a quiet order no one had given. SEALs first, then intelligence officers, then men and women who understood enough to know respect when they saw it. No cheering, no theatrics, just people rising. I remained where I was. I did not wave. I did not bow my head like a man accepting applause. This was not applause. It felt closer to a debt being acknowledged, not to me as a hero, but to the truth of service, done in silence. What would have meant more to you? An apology from the people who hurt you, or respect from the people whose lives you actually touched? I can tell you what it meant to me. It meant I had spent too many years begging the wrong room to see me. Porter stood at the microphone, his notes lowered in one hand. He looked at Soren, then at Arden, then finally at my father. The hall remained standing. Dorian could not move. Callum could not speak. For the first time in my life, neither of them controlled the story. Then Porter leaned toward the microphone, hesitant but clear. "Captain Voss," he said, "would you like to explain why Rear Admiral Keaton Voss was not listed with your family tonight?" The room had found the missing chapter. The only problem was that my family had spent 15 years pretending it did not exist. When the microphone changed hands, the last version of the lie began to fall apart. Porter held the microphone like it had suddenly become too heavy. My father looked at him, then at the room, then at me. For a man who had spent his life giving orders, silence did not suit him. It made him look older. Not weak, exactly, just exposed. The military section was still standing. Not clapping, not shouting, standing. That was worse for my father than noise. Noise could be managed. Respect could not be argued with. Porter spoke again, softer this time. "Rear Admiral Voss, would you be willing to join us?" The room turned toward me. I did not move right away. I felt the compass in my pocket. I felt the folded memo inside my jacket. I felt every year between the boy who wanted his father to look proud and the man now being asked to walk into the center of a truth his family had tried to bury. Before I could take a step, Dorian moved. He crossed to Porter and held out his hand for the microphone. Porter hesitated, but my father was still Captain Voss in that room, still wrapped in reputation, still dangerous in the way polished men can be dangerous when the truth corners them. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father began, "I appreciate the respect being shown here tonight." His voice was calm, too calm. Then he turned slightly, not toward me, but toward the audience. "Every family has complicated chapters. My younger son has always struggled with boundaries, and I had hoped tonight could remain focused on service, tradition, and the people who have carried this family name with dignity." There it was, the old move. Do not answer the truth. Reframe the person telling it. Callum stepped beside him, his face tight. "This isn't about rank, Keaton," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is about respect. You weren't invited to make this about yourself." A few people shifted uncomfortably. My mother lowered her eyes. For one sharp second, I felt the old trap open under my feet. If I defended myself too hard, I would become the story they had always told. Angry, difficult, ungrateful. So I said nothing. I only stood. That was when Arden Rusk's voice cut through the room. "No, sir." The two words were quiet, but they carried. My father turned. Arden stood straighter, old injuries and all. "Rear Admiral Voss didn't make this about himself. You made it about him when you removed him from his own father's ceremony." The room went still. Then Arden looked at me. "Rear Admiral Voss," he said. "Front row, sir." Something moved through the hall after that. Not drama. Correction. Chairs shifted. Officers stepped aside. The path opened from the back of the room to the front, like the room itself had decided where I belonged. Soren Pike stood again, calm and absolute. "With respect, Captain Voss," he said, "there are officers in this room who are alive because of Rear Admiral Keaton Voss. That is not family gossip. That is service." Arden added, "We came home because he refused to quit on us." Another man spoke from the side. "So did mine." Then another. "His work changed how we survived." No secrets were revealed, no classified details, just impact, just men naming the shape of a debt without opening the file. My father's face lost color. Callum stared at me like he had finally realized I had not been beneath him. I had been out of frame. I walked toward the stage, not fast, not angry. The closer I got, the less I wanted revenge. Revenge would have been easy. A speech, the memo, a public tearing down. I had all the tools, but that was not why I had come. I stopped a few feet from my father. For the first time all night, he looked directly at me. Then he looked away. That small failure told the whole room more than I ever could have. I took the microphone from Porter, not from my father. "I didn't come here to take anything from anyone," I said. No one moved. "I came because he was my father." The words landed harder than accusation because they told the truth underneath everything. Not jealousy, not ambition. A son, still foolish enough to arrive with an invitation his mother had mailed, hoping there might be one chair left for him. Callum's voice came out rough. "How long?" I looked at him. 15 years. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. "I wasn't hiding, Callum. You were comfortable not knowing." His face changed then. Not anger, shame. And my father, the man who once told me I was the biggest disappointment this family ever produced, stood close enough to touch me and still could not find the courage to meet my eyes. That was when those words finally lost their power. Not because he took them back, because I no longer believed them. If someone spends years refusing to see your worth, would their apology still matter? I don't know what answer I would have given earlier that day, but standing there, I knew mine. I did not need my father to make me whole. I needed to stop handing him the pieces. 6 months passed before I returned to my parents' house for dinner. The ceremony did not vanish from people's minds, but it stopped being the only thing anyone talked about. In Navy circles, it became one of those stories told carefully, with lowered voices and raised eyebrows. Some people called it justice. Some called it uncomfortable. A few called it unfortunate, which is what people say when the truth embarrasses someone they respect. Life moved on because life always does, but it did not move backward. That mattered. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked inside a plain white envelope. My mother's handwriting was on the front, slower than I remembered, less certain. "Keaton, Sunday dinner, if you're willing. Mom." That was all. No long apology, no explanation, no dramatic promise that things would be different. Just 7 words and a signature that somehow felt heavier than a letter full of excuses. I left it on my kitchen counter for almost an hour. The old version of me would have answered right away. He would have grabbed at the smallest sign of welcome and called it love. He would have thought, maybe this is it. Maybe they finally understand. I was not that man anymore. Healing does not mean running back to the table the minute someone pulls out a chair. Sometimes it means standing in the doorway long enough to decide whether you actually want to sit down. I went that Sunday because I chose to, not because I needed to. The house looked the same when I pulled up. Weathered flag by the porch, white trim needing paint near the gutters, the same front steps that creaked under my shoes before I even reached the door. My mother opened it before I knocked. She looked smaller. Or maybe I had finally stopped seeing her through the eyes of a son waiting to be protected. "Keaton," she said. "Mom." She stepped aside. The hallway smelled like roast chicken, old wood, and lemon cleaner. Nothing about it should have surprised me, yet every corner carried a memory. Callum's trophies in the den, my father's framed commendations, family photographs along the living room wall. That was where my eyes went first. For most of my life, that wall had told a simple story. Callum at football banquets, Callum at graduation, Callum in uniform, Callum beside my father, again and again, as if the Voss name had only needed one son to carry it. There had been pictures of me too, technically, near the edges, smaller frames, group shots where I looked like a guest at my own childhood. But now, in the center, there was a new photograph, not larger than the rest, not placed under a spotlight, just present. It showed the reception hall on the night of my father's retirement. I stood near the stage, face turned slightly away from the camera. Behind me, rows of officers were on their feet. Arden Rusk was visible near the front, one hand at his side, watching with the solemn expression of a man who understood what was being repaired. I stared at it longer than I meant to. My mother came up beside me. "Porter sent it." I did not answer. She folded her hands. I should have turned around that night. That was the closest she had come to naming her part in it. I looked at her, and for once I did not try to rescue her from the discomfort. "Yes," I said, "you should have." Her eyes filled, but she nodded. Dinner was awkward but not cruel. That was new for us. My father sat at the head of the table out of habit, though he did not control the conversation the way he once had. Callum spoke less. He passed dishes, asked normal questions, did not perform. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. "I spent years thinking if people saw you," he said, "they'd stop seeing me." No one moved. I looked at my older brother, really looked at him. He seemed tired, not defeated by me, but by the version of himself he had worked so hard to protect. "That was never my decision to make," I said. "I know." He did not ask me to tell him it was all right. That helped. My father stayed quiet until coffee. Then, without looking at the wall of photographs, he asked, "Those multinational coordination channels Soren mentioned, how did you get that many commands to trust one framework?" It sounded like a technical question. It was not. It was curiosity, maybe even respect. I answered him plainly, not warmly, not coldly, just plainly. He listened. That was the part I had not expected. Dorian Voss never gave me the apology people imagine in stories. He never stood in the doorway with tears in his eyes and said he had been wrong about everything. Men like my father often change in inches, not speeches. But he listened. And at that stage of my life, I had learned not to confuse an incomplete repair with no repair at all. I also knew better than to call it finished. On my way home that night, I stopped at a red light near the water. The old brass compass sat in the cup holder beside the folded program from the ceremony. Arden had taken a pen to it before I left that night. Rear Admiral Keaton Voss, present. I ran my thumb over the paper once, then looked up into the rearview mirror. For years I had seen the forgotten son, the disappointment, the man still waiting for his father to decide he mattered. That night I saw someone else, A man who had survived being underestimated. A leader who did not need applause to be real. A son who had finally stopped measuring his worth through someone else's refusal to see it. My father's ceremony was not the night I became important. It was the night I stopped believing I wasn't. And that changed everything. Have you ever spent years trying to earn approval from someone who never seemed willing to give it? Sometimes the people who understand us best are the ones who have carried the same invisible wounds.